with us from Washington is Dr. Fedi Heleni, a senior fellow of National Council on U.S. and Arab Relations. And joining us from Cairo is Mr. Ahmed Maharem, who's a writer and political researcher. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much for being here with us on Qnews. I'll start with you, Dr. Heleni. Why do you think that the United States is still calling Gaza's blockade lawful when the United States, Human Rights Watch, the International Committee of the Red Cross, all deem it illegal and a legal collective punishment?
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for having me, and greetings to your guest also. Obviously, this brings us back to the question, what is going on in Gaza? You know that the United States is terming the Israeli war machine as an act of self-defense. Not, of course, very much looking at the response coming from possibly Hamas leaders or Hamas loyalists. So rather than terming what's going on as a war machine against civilian people, the lenses through which the U.S. looks at what's going on is as an Israeli self-defense and attacking terrorism due to what happened in October 7, as we all know. So looking in context to how the United States is looking at the flotilla helps us understand why the United States is seeing this as not a violation of international law. Of course, we understand that the flotilla is going to provide humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza, but what Israel claims is that the blockade is lawful, again, because according to the Israeli government, they are protecting themselves against, as they call it, terrorism. If the blockade is termed as lawful under the San Romeo manual, which Israel is trying to invoke, that can provide the Israeli government with lawful claims that it's stopping the ships from going into Gaza because of their claims that these ships are smuggling weapons to terrorists, and the meaning here is to Hamas. So their action of intercepting the flotilla, even if this happens in international waters, by the way, still gives Israel some lawful claims that what the Israeli government is doing is legal. And that is what the U.S. also is claiming at the same time, that this is a lawful act of self-defense and not as NGOs, possibly the United Nations and the ICRC, as you mentioned, see as blocking humanitarian aid from going to its deserved people. So this is where the legal conflict arises.
Okay, and we'll go into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. I'll bring you in, Ahmed Maharem. If the physical aid, which of course it will fail to get where it is supposed to go, do you think the flotilla is succeeding in the secondary mission of bringing attention and trying to mobilize people globally, politically, and trying to delegitimize the current siege?
Well, I think it's not the first time, and it's not going to be the least time, that such a kind of activity is presenting the solidarity of the human people around the world. But unfortunately, Israel does not respect the international law. They are always against what's happening. It's a matter of pressure, I think. The people they are trying to send those 40 ships representing different countries and very good representing are on the board. Some of them are politicians, some of them are very high ranks in their governments and their official work, to come around the Siag of Palestine and on the distance of 130 kilometers from the border of Palestine or border of Gaza. Israel used to do that kind of capture them and take them to the jail and send them back. That really represents to what extent Israel does not care about the international law. And let us hope that something can happen this time, because it shows what America and Israel are planning to do within the next few weeks is exactly different than what the world is expecting.
And coming back to you, Dr. Heleni, you set out brilliantly what the United States and Israel position would be against those perhaps of other organizations. When it comes to things like UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, does it break, if it's not breaking international law, would it find itself coming up against something like UNCLOS?
Right, that's a very good question. And indeed, if we look at it in principle, it does violate the UNCLOS. And there is a very much a violation of international law because these ships are intercepted in international waters. And some of the voices in the Israeli government are still claiming that this is possibly happening in Gaza territorial waters. Regardless of the fact whether it happened within the territorial waters of Gaza or international waters, in fact, there are two things we need to keep in mind. Number one, we know this by looking at all what's going on in the Middle East. Israel doesn't care about international law as far as it is invoking what it calls self-defense. Let's take, for example, the violation of airspace in Syria. This is a very clearly violation of international law because the Israeli Air Force is going into the airspace of another country. Still, they make the claim we are doing this as an act of self-defense. The same logic goes to Gaza. Even if that blockade occurred out of Gaza's territorial waters and it occurs in the international waters, still, the Israeli government is trying to invoke, as I mentioned, the San Romeo manual, which gives it the right to block any traffic going into a blockade, to break a blockade, as far as this breaking of the blockade is going to smuggle weapons to terrorists, as they call it. So to put it in very short and simple terms, is it breaking international law? Yes, it is. But what the legal cover Israel is trying to put here is that the blockade is legal because Israel is in self-defense and it's fighting terrorism. So this gives it the right under the San Romeo manual to stop any shipments going to enter that blockade because it's possibly carrying shipments of weapons, smuggling some materials which could help terrorists. So that is the lawful, if you will, or the legal cover that the Israelis are trying to put themselves in. So it's a kind of an argument, if you will, which is possibly going to go for some time, as we understand, because while some people see it as a break of international law, violation of international law, the Israelis and, of course, whoever supports them claim that this is an act of self-defense and it's legal under the San Romeo manual.
Yes, Dr. Heleni, it is that old thing of Israel has the mantra, Israel has the right to defend itself. But it's unlikely, Dr. Heleni, that Greta Thunberg is going to have, a few missiles in a handbag or something like that. It just sounds pretty preposterous. I'll come to you, Ahmed Maharem. Why doesn't the UN have any teeth at the moment?
Well, I think the one who has the power, the one who's occupying 80% of the Gaza Strip, is Israel. So what other people around the world are trying to send this kind of aids to the Palestinian people in Gaza is a kind to represent the solidarity of the humanitarian around the world. But Israel has all the power to explain in their own way that can reject something and do something else. It is a matter of who have the power, who can say yes or no. Israel is playing around, and I think it's a matter of shame that so many other efforts was done by different honest people around the world. It comes to be faced an unrespect from Israeli government supported by the US aid.
And coming to you, Dr. Heleni, the ICJ has given provisional orders for humanitarian access. When we look at this 20-point plan that has come out of Washington in the last week, one of the points in that is that if Hamas agrees to this particular deal, Israel will start allowing humanitarian access. Surely that should be something that is being done already through international law.
Yes, that's very important to put it that way. So let's look at Trump's 21 plan. And very briefly, yes, the United States will be supporting and helping humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. And it would like also to be opening more humanitarian corridors. But this is only going to happen after the disarmament of Hamas. So as far as Hamas is there, the United States will look with suspicion to any humanitarian aid corridor which is not happening under the supervision of the United States and in a way not approved by the Israelis as going to help support Hamas to possibly use food as a weapon. And we keep hearing, of course, in media in the United States that Hamas is weaponizing food in a sense. So there's a very clear tendency in the American administration always to tie humanitarian aids to the advancement of negotiations going with Hamas. Now, the moment when President Trump put that 21-point plan, what is coming after is never like what happened before. Because we are speaking here about the end of the war, Hamas giving up its arms, giving back the, of course, hostages, and there is no future for Hamas in Gaza. So this is a moment where Hamas has to choose between staying and leaving from U.S. perspective. Now, as far as Hamas is staying, this is helping complicate the situation in Gaza, and it helps actually the Israeli narrative to confuse the public, whether in the West or the United States, that anything happening in Gaza is because of Hamas. So, will the United States provide better, more supported human corridors when Hamas, let's say, agrees to this 21-point plan? In my opinion, yes, this is going to happen. But as far as we still don't have a ceasefire in in Gaza, and the Israelis are making use of this narrative, as I mentioned, of self-defense, this is still going to complicate the situation. So to answer your question directly, whatever is happening now is from looking from a humanitarian lens is illegal. But again, the Israelis are making this narrative, invoking this narrative of self-defense. Blocking, of course, the flotilla from going into Gaza is going to help NGOs, other possibly legal institutions to file claims against Israel. But let's remember that the ICJ's provisional orders don't have teeth. So there is no kind of enforcement mechanism. As far as Israel has the power, their narrative, unfortunately, at least for now, is going to prevail until we have a very clear ceasefire, a very clear disarmament of Hamas in a way that will help, of course, the Palestinians, the human corridors. Up till that time, we will still have an Israeli narrative which is trying to confuse and complicate the situation and provide it as a self-defense narrative.
Coming to you, Ahmed Maharem, you're in Cairo right now, but I know you've spent a lot of time in the United States as well. Dr. Heleni there mentioning the Israeli narrative to confuse. What is your view in how well Israel does at getting their point of view and their message across to audiences in the United States and in the West?
Well, I think maybe everybody was observing what's happening on the last week, where the General Assembly for the 80 years on the United Nations to respect what kind of reflection and the picture shows the people representing their countries. Israel was actually in a very bad shape, but still, unfortunately, the United States are giving support. The demonstration was taking place in the New York, around the places of the United Nations, where the leaders were attending their conference. I think it shows the solidarity of the human people, not only the American, all the people from the world. 193 countries are representing that they have to do something to support Palestine. In the future, I think something from the American administration has to be done in order to show that it cannot stay like that forever. Supporting Israel will make kind of shame against their international policy.
And over the past few weeks and months, Dr. Heleni, we've seen protests in the West, specifically or particularly in Europe, but all over the world, protests about this particular situation, about the Gaza situation. But now we have protests after the flotilla as well in Italy. Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister there, facing quite a backlash. Why don't we see the same kind of protest in the United States? Is it because politics is really focused and Donald Trump takes up all the airtime and everybody's bandwidth for politics in the United States?
To be fair, there has been a lot of protests in the United States, especially in university campuses, demonstrating against the United States' continuous support to Israel. And there has been a lot of demands that the United States tie its support to Israel, depending on, of course, the advancement of peace and negotiation efforts, depending, of course, on the Israeli government cooperation. However, we know that President Trump has, of course, from his rhetoric, of course, labeled these demonstrations as very much, in a way, supporting Hamas. And there is, and I mentioned something about the confusion in the American media, for people who don't know a lot of what's going on in Palestine and Gaza, there is a very much confusion about Hamas and the Palestinians. So many people, for example, will refer to the Palestinian flag as Hamas flag. Did this help possibly reduce the number of demonstrations? In a way, yes. But again, I will say that there has been a lot of demonstrations. And every time, by the way, Netanyahu comes to the White House, you can see a lot of rallies against his visit and a lot of demonstrations. So this is happening, actually. But, you know, the domestic politics in the United States, things may not be sometimes very much made clear, especially with all what's going on now within the U.S. domestic politics. Coming back to your question, the European demonstrations are in a way, have been in a way translated to this declaration from many European states and recognition of the Palestinian state. There is much pressure also in the United States for similar steps to happen. However, up till now, President Trump's administration is trying, in my opinion, to take a kind of a balanced stance. Number one, trying to find an end for the conflict, ceasefire, which is a path, in President Trump's opinion, to a permanent ceasefire, which is going to open the door for Palestinian Authority ruling of Gaza in the future after a transition period, and of course a two-state solution. Balancing this proposition with, of course, helping the Israeli government in a way to withdraw from Gaza and in the war. So the United States wants to balance this. We know that there is much support from the U.S. to the Israeli government. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, this gives the U.S. very much leverage to give Benjamin Netanyahu, a red light when to stop and, of course, go for a peace treaty or ceasefire as the United States deems necessarily. And we saw that President Trump last Monday, for example, was able to put forward his plan and bring Benjamin Netanyahu to the table. So the U.S. politics, I want to say, the dynamics of U.S. politics is very much different from the Europeans in a way. But still, I can say on the popular level, the Palestinian cause has very much kind of, I will say, leverage and influence in the U.S. Internal domestic politics, especially among youth who have been following in social media what's going on in Gaza and the war machine that has been going on for 2 years. So there is much less Israel can do with the legal, as I mentioned in the previous comment, aspect of the San Romeo Manual, saying that this is legal. There is much pressure coming from the public, whether in the United States and the European societies. And what's happening now with the flotilla is going to add much pressure on the Israeli government to end that war on the public, of course, level, as I mentioned.
Okay, and Ahmed, Maharem, obviously on this particular flotilla, in this particular instance, there are quite a few European parliamentarians on board this flotilla. Have you heard much of their respective governments speaking out on this issue?
Well, I think there is expected to be a political support towards what's happening, because that will make a conflict for the interest of those different countries. What Israel is doing is actually against the respect of not only the international law, the theme of the diplomacy. So many countries in Europe are facing a kind of problem with the Israeli government, that they are not respecting not only the international law, but also the matter of relation, the matter of diplomacy. I think in time, very soon, some kind of solidarity will show that as a support will be a political support to what's happening.
And I just want to come back to you just before we finish, Dr. Heleni. You're, of course, a senior fellow at the National Council on U.S. and Arab Relations. I just wanted to ask you a question about the United States. Of course, we've seen quite a crackdown on the freedom of speech in the United States. Not only people who are campaigning pro-Gaza arrested on campuses, some, of course, released since, and also the threat to take away people's visas if they're not a United States citizen. We've seen television shows, late-night hosts cancelled, some returned. Do you worry about your organization and your ability to speak freely on an issue where you might be at odds with the White House?
Thank you very much for asking this question. Two things here very importantly to clarify. Number one, this possibly the first part of the question brings us back to your first question about how far legal what Israel did, and of course this becomes now the argument about self-defense versus, of course, breaking human law, of course, humanitarian laws. The same thing applies to your reference here to cracking down on some demonstrations. When these demonstrations are deemed by the United States authorities as possibly in a way supporting terrorism and of course repeating slogans that support Hamas, that will be seen not as supporting Palestinian people, but as very much supporting a terrorist organization. So that will give the legal ground, if you will, for authorities not to allow these demonstrations. Because let's remember that Hamas, under US law, is a terrorist organization. That is one thing. Another thing is freedom of speech. Am I worried? Honestly, no, I'm not. Freedom of speech is very much guaranteed in the United States. There are institutions, there is a role of law, as we know. So when there is a conflict between what's happening on the ground and US authorities, the court has the last say. And we know that there is a very strong role of law here. And we have many incidents when, for example, the United States wanted to deport somebody illegally, and the court stood and stopped this from happening. In other ways, as far as the freedom of speech in the United States, it's not supporting a terrorist organization. Nobody, neither in the administration nor the authorities, can, of course, intercept with these activities. But when this conflict happens, of course, the court will always have the last say. And this is why it's important, in my opinion, and as I mentioned in a previous comment, that when this war comes to an end in Gaza and Hamas is out of the scene, this is going to help a lot the Palestinian narrative. Because up until this point, there is much confusion, as I mentioned, in the media, in the public opinion about Hamas versus the Palestinians.
Okay.
Even when it comes to humanitarian aid, there is very much claim by a strong wing here in the United States that food is being weaponized by Hamas. Okay,
so I'm sorry to cut you off slightly before you wanted to finish there, but we are out of time. It's a very strange world when I can even ask that question about the freedom of speech in the United States, really. But thank you very much, Dr. Fedi Heleni, Senior Fellow of the National Council on U.S. and Arab Relations, joining us from Washington, and also Ahmed Maharem, a writer and political researcher, joining us from here in Cairo. Thank you very much, both of you.